Okay, every day on my subreddit, there's going to be an article posted, and then as long as I'm not doing a sponsored event, why don't you check out the memes too? Do a real Reddit recap. Okay, anyway, well, at the very least, there'll be these threads that you can post your stories to or whatever, if you want me to read them. And then I'll just look at like the top most upvoted ones.
You gnome fuck!
Chomsky disagrees with Destiny on NAFTA. Is this going to be some fucking cancer? Oh,
You
okay.
gnome fuck!
Okay. Free trade. Noam Chomsky. Daily Camera, which is part of the Knight Ritter chain, ran a series of questions and answers about GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. They answered the question, who would benefit from a GATT agreement, by writing, consumers would be the big winners. Does that track with your understanding? Daily Camera, which is part of is a newspaper. Okay. What is Knight Ritter? Maybe a company an American media company specializing in newspaper and internet fishing. Gotcha. Or, I'm sorry, publishing, not fishing. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade is a legal agreement between many countries. So this just refers to like any type of like multi or bilateral trade agreement or whatever? Or is this a specific? Oh no, this is a specific one. On the 30th of October, 1947. That was first discussed during the UN Conference on Trade and Employment, was the outcome of the failure of negotiating governments to create the ITO. It was signed by 23 nations in Geneva, took effect, remained in effect until this 1994. Of the Uruguay Round Agreements, which established the WTO, 1st of January 1995. Okay, so the WTO was a successor to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades. Okay. Gotcha. By writing, consumers would be the big winners. Does this track with your understanding? If they mean rich consumers, yes, they'll gain, but much of the population will see a decline in wages, both in rich countries and poor ones. Take a look at NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, where the analysis has already been done. The day after NAFTA passed, the New York Times had its first article on its expected impact in the New York region. Its conclusions apply to GATT too. It was a very upbeat article. They talked about how wonderful NAFTA was going to be. They said that finance and services would be particularly big winners. Banks, investment firms, PR firms, corporate law firms will do just great. Some manufacturers will also benefit. For example, publishing, the chemical industry, which is highly capital intensive with not many workers to worry about. Then they said, well, there will be some losers too. Women, Hispanics, other minorities, and semi-skilled workers. In other words, about 2/3 of the workforce. But everyone else will do just fine. Just as anyone who was paying attention knew, the purpose of NAFTA was to create an even smaller sector of highly privileged people, investors, professionals, managerial classes. Bear in mind that this is a rich country, so this privileged sector, although small, still isn't tiny. It will work fine for them, and the general population will suffer. The prediction for Mexico is exactly the same. The leading financial journal in Mexico, which is very pro-NAFTA, estimated that Mexico would lose about 25% of its manufacturing capacity in the first few years and about 15% of its manufacturing labor force. In addition, cheap U.S. agricultural exports are expected to drive several million people off the land. That's going to mean a substantial increase in the unemployed workforce in Mexico, which of course will drive down wages. So my understanding is, so there's two things that we can do. So one is there are IGM polls on NAFTA impact on like the average consumer. This is for consumers. Freer trade improves productivity, efficiency, and offers consumers better choices, and in the long run, these gains are much larger than any effects on unemployment. I think most economists generally agree with this. This is not a very controversial claim. I wonder if I've saved any of my studies. There were a couple big ones. There were two big ones I remember reading back when I used to work out. I would read these in between sets. I don't know if I saved these. Hold on. Control F NAFTA. Oh, I do have a couple of these saved. I wonder if there are like some like I wonder what the gold standard like de facto NAFTA studies would be. I remember reading through this paper a long time ago. I think basically the major claims made by this paper was that the overall impact on the U.S. economy was like okay. There was a large positive impact on the Mexican economy. That generally there are certain sectors of workers that might lose out a little bit, but the overall liberalization of trade generally benefits most people. You see like imports and exports rising from both countries. Anytime trade liberalization increases and you see more trade going, it means that there's like better economic opportunities found, right? Because people are trading more. So they've found better goods or services to trade and everything. I think this paper also made the argument that the increased specialization also leads to economic efficiency gains in both regions as well. I don't really feel like going over this whole fucking paper though. I again link it in chat. I don't know if there's like considered like this is a gold standard paper on NAFTA. I don't know who like the only two researchers I've ever like followed, it was individual researchers were Borjas and Card over their immigration studies. Estimates of the trade and welfare effects of NAFTA. We build a Ricardian model, sectoral linkages, trade and intermediate goods, and sectorial heterogeneity in production to quantify the trade and welfare effects of their changes. We also propose a new method. Mexico's welfare increased by 1.31%, and the U.S.'s welfare increased by 0.08%. And Canada's welfare declines by 0.06%. Okay, this sounds similar to what I read in that other paper then. We saw a larger gain by Mexico, a modest gain by US, not a good trade-off for Canada. We find that intra-block trade increases by 118% for Mexico, 11% for Canada, 41% for the US. We show that welfare effects from tariff reductions are reduced when the structure of production does not take into account intermediate goods or input-output linkages. Our results highlight the importance of sectoral heterogeneity, intermediate goods, sectoral linkages for the quantity. Okay. Chomsky and his types hate free trade agreements in general. Yeah, I understand that, but the reason why, Chomsky and those types have issues with free trade, but like the issues with free trade they have is understandable. I think generally the issues they have is that if we're going to have free trade, the people that are most positioned to take advantage of these deals are going to be very wealthy people. So if we're going to engage in these free trade agreements, we need to have some way of transferring the massive gains that the ultra wealthy are making off of them to poorer people. I think that's a fair critique. I think that's okay. We can listen to this real quick. Why should we oppose free trade agreements such as the TTIP?
It's not a free trade agreement.
Oh, fuck, sorry.
It's not a free trade.
Don't these agreements assist economic growth for the general population?
It's not a free trade agreement. It has virtually nothing to do with free trade. Virtually nothing. Well, tariffs do exist, but they're very low, and changing the tariff agreements means essentially nothing. It's a protectionist agreement. It's anti-free trade. Now take a look at it. First of all, it's in secret. Remember, it's crucially in secret. The population's not supposed to know about it. Now, it's not totally in secret. The corporate lawyers and lobbyists who are writing the agreement, it's not secret from them. So it's not secret to the corporate world. It's not secret to the state authority. It's just secret from the population. Already tells you something. Pieces have been leaked.
So the reason why these things remain secret, now I'm just explaining why, whether or not you think that's okay or not is up for you, I guess, to decide. But the reason why the negotiations themselves are secret is because you can't really negotiate when every single person is like breathing over your shoulder, looking over and critiquing. Like you want to have like the final, like this is the final round, this is what we've agreed on, and then this is what you decide whether or not you should pass the legislation. Having this idea that you want, like you're going back and forth, this person's asking for this person's giving that. If you're going to have the public constantly critiquing every single type of negotiation you're going to make, it's going to inhibit your ability to actually effectively get those negotiations done because you're going to have public pressure weighing on you at every single stage of those negotiations. I think most people generally agree that that's not a healthy way to do negotiations, that you want to have some kind of freedom there to negotiate behind closed doors without pressure on every single stage of that agreement, and then the public can come in and view basically the final product. With everyone breathing over your shoulder, you get bonger Brexit negotiations. Kind of, yeah, sure.
Through WikiLeaks. One piece that was leaked was the intellectual property rights section, which is one of the core elements of the agreement. And what are intellectual property rights? Now, that's a complicated word that means highly protectionist measures to ensure the profits, the exorbitant profits of American and international pharmaceutical corporations and media corporations.
So the only thing that I don't like here is when we, like, Chomsky does this. I know he's smarter than this, or maybe it's just because he's giving a speech. I don't like it when we only present something in its worst possible light. So like what? There's like a million different analogies I can think of. We won't use an analogy. So what do patents actually do? Okay, a patent isn't there to protect the corporate interests of pharmaceuticals. A patent exists so that you can recoup the losses on a significantly large capital investment. That's what a patent exists for. That's it. Now, does it tend to benefit wealthy people, poor people, whatever? Like, yeah, those are things we can analyze as well. But like patents in and of themselves aren't necessarily bad, right? Let's say that I invest my life savings into coming up with some new technology and I do it and it's awesome. And then a big company comes in and steals it from me, right? Patents can protect smaller companies as well from larger companies just stealing their ideas and then going forward with them. Now, in today's world, most small companies just sell to larger companies anyway, which is a whole other dumb fucking monopoly problem in the U.S. But the patents are probably necessary for things that have high capital investment with a low marginal cost of production. So let me explain what this means real quick, okay? Generally, I'm generalizing a lot here, okay? Generally, to make any given pill, any given medication is usually not very expensive, okay? We're gonna give these in. These are in hundreds of millions, okay? So 100 million, 200 million, 300 million, 400 million, 500 million, okay? And then let's say that this is one pill, this is 1,000 pills, these are 10,000 pills, these are 100,000 pills, okay? So we'll say this is like logarithmic or whatever, okay? So we'll say like 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million pills, right? If I'm going to make one pill of a medication, okay, it's going to cost me $400 million just to make one pill. But if I want to make two pills, it's going to cost me like $400 million and $2, $400 million and $4 for the next one, right? The reason why is because all of the research and development that goes into all of this work to bring a drug from phase 1, phase 2 through phase 3 trials, the average cost of bringing a drug to market in the United States, I think, is about $500 million. Average cost, bring a drug to market, phase 3 trials. Okay, holy shit, I don't know why I'm so off on that. I thought I read this something. It's more expensive than that. The median cost of bringing a drug to market is actually $985 million. The study notes that estimates have ranged from $314 million to $2.8 billion. Okay, but okay, Jesus. All right. So the average cost, the average cost to bring any given drug to market can be $1 billion. Okay. So if I'm going to invest $1 billion to bringing a drug to market, okay, once I start making pills, isn't a lot of that cost subsidized by public universities? No, that is not true. Let me explain this in a second, okay? Is that with just one drug? Yes, drugs are very, 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 very expensive, okay? So so if I'm going to make this huge capital investment, right? So the amount of money that we've spent for one pill is going to be the integral, is the area under the curve, right? It's going to be all of this money to make this, right? Wait, that actually wouldn't be correct because as it goes up, you're not adding all this money. Oh God, I'm forgetting all my calc. I don't remember. Listen, regardless, wait, how would you graph that? No, it is cumulative, right? Oh, no. I would need to take the derivative of this graph because I would want to see, I would want to take the integral of something that shows me the cost for every pill. So the cost would be here, and then the cost would be here. And I would take the integral of that graph, and that's what would give me the total cost spent on like every single pill, right? I think. Yeah, sorry, fuck. Don't judge me, Kogasa. Okay. Sorry, okay, anyways. Yeah, if you have this huge capital investment to get your first pill out, if somebody can just come by and can just buy that formula or steal that formula and start producing it, you're fucked, right? You need this patent to protect your ability to make money, not just even profit, but even just to cover costs. However, yeah. So, so what are some problems with this? Well, could patents be abused? Are patents bad? You know, do we see companies, blah, blah, blah? Maybe one potential. So here's the solution. I'm going to try when I do these, I'm going to try to present solutions alongside potential problems or critiques. Getting rid of patents is probably not good, right? We need some type of patent to protect capital investment in order to make it worthwhile. Otherwise, nobody would invest in things that have a low marginal cost of production. When I say marginal cost, do we know what that means? Marginal cost means to make the next thing is very cheap, right? So to make one pill is $400 million, or I'm sorry, $985 million. To make two pills is $985 million and $2. To make three pills is $985 million and $4, right? The marginal cost, the cost to make the next thing is very, very, very low. The initial capital, the initial cost is very, very high, right? So things that have a very, very low marginal cost after the initial big capital investment is very fucked. So here's two potential ways that you could deal with this. One way that I've heard suggested is there are patent rewards where once you develop or manufacture a drug, the government just buys it from you. So let's say that I spend $1 billion manufacturing this drug. The government comes in and they buy, we'll say profit is, you get 20%, right? So they'll take that $1 billion R&D you did and they'll buy the patent from you for $1.2 billion. Oh, cool. And then boom, now the drug is available, government can manufacture it, or other companies can manufacture it and sell it at greatly reduced costs because they're not trying to recoup all the R&D. That's one thing I've heard. A second thing I've heard is we could have it so that patents only last for as long as they need to give you a certain profit margin. So maybe we say 15% profit is worthwhile on a patent. You've spent $1 billion. Once you've made $1.15 billion selling the pills, then now your patent expires because you made enough money. Those are two potential solutions that I've heard of to address patents better. And I don't know offhand if economists agree to disagree with those, but those are like two ideas that seem interesting to me. I haven't seen the research on if either of those are effective, but yeah, I think that's fine. Do you have an estimated time frame for that option? No, these are all unlikely because I don't think anybody talks about this type of shit. People just don't like patents at all, or they love them. I don't know, but
that's anti-free trade. That's protection, extreme protectionism in the interests of very wealthy and powerful parts of the corporate system. Other parts are called, which we don't have the details of, remember, because it's secret. But looking at other agreements, we can guess. Are a variety of investor rights provisions to ensure the rights of investors against the population. Take, say, NAFTA, which we do know because it's there. We can see it was also negotiated in secret, but now it's public.
So you have to protect the rights of investors in any free trade agreement. The reason why you have to do this is because if I'm going to go to another country and do business, I don't ever want to fucking go to court in that country on behalf of my business because countries will fuck you over, okay? Countries, if I'm an American and I've got a firm in Brazil and I get accused of doing shit there, I don't want to have to be an American with my American company in Brazil going against fucking in Brazilian courts because I'm always going to be disfavored there. Fuck that shit. They're going to favor their own companies. Fuck that. I'm not going to trust that bullshit. So usually if you engage in these multilateral trade agreements, usually you have these third-party arbitration agreements set up. You want some sort of arbitration because you don't want to have to rely on a country to legislate or arbitrate disagreements between you and native firms, right? That's just standard practice. You would always want that in any type of multilateral trade agreement. There's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You would want to protect investor interest in order for them to open up shop in other countries. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
A large part of it is guarantees of the rights of U.S. investors to what's called national treatment in Mexico. So if General Motors invests in Mexico, it has to be treated like a Mexican company. If a Mexican human being comes to New York, he doesn't have the rights of an American citizen. Quite the contrary, can end up in prison for the rest of his life. But American corporations...
But this is a totally different thing. But an individual citizen going somewhere may or may not be entitled to all of the rights that a citizen will get in that country. But just because GM has that national treatment provision as part of NAFTA doesn't mean that the GM citizens are going to be treated as Mexican citizens. Again, you just don't want to go into a country and have them steal your shit. You don't want to go into a country and like have them expropriate your shit and be like, oh, this is our shit now. Or, you know, have somebody sue you and you're massively disfavored by the local courts there. It's totally standard. There's nothing wrong with this.
Have to have the rights of Mexican businesses. U.S. agribusiness, highly subsidized agribusiness, totally against free trade, has to have the right to flood the Mexican market with the produce that the Mexican campesinos can't compete with, of course. So that sets up what's called a refugee immigration crisis when they're driven off the land and they flee.
This is part of your trade negotiations. Opening up your markets to other people's subsidized goods is pretty fucked up. I think Mexican agriculture was hurt a bit. I think that sector was when NAFTA opened because American like corn and shit is subsidized and we were able to dramatically flood their markets. But I mean, technically that's good for the U.S. I mean, that means we negotiated a good deal. They allowed us to flood their markets with subsidized goods, so they got fucked. That's fucking Mexico. I mean, we shouldn't be fucking people over, but I mean, it's kind of on them to negotiate, right?
That's NAFTA. One of the provisions allows a corporation, not a person, not you or me, but it allows a corporation to sue a state if the state is taking measures which might potentially interfere with profits. So
this is, I wish fucking Brooks would have fucking debated me before he fucking died. This is part of what I wanted to talk about. So people always call out these same things like, well, part of these free trade deals allow you to sue a country if they're trying to protect the environment, just if they're going after their profits. This is a common example that's brought up over and over and over again. And Brooks actually stumbled into one of these examples that I was intimately familiar with. I don't remember it as much anymore, but there was was it a tire making firm in Canada, I think, where there was a firm that was making, I'm half doing a hypothetical here because I don't remember exactly, but I think it was a firm that was making tires in Canada, and Canada started to pass this legislation that was total bullshit. Basically, of all the tire companies, they were trying to pass laws that were making one specific chemical that this one specific company was using illegal to make that company less competitive. And that company sued the Canadian government with, I don't know if they used the WTO or what arbitration they appealed to, but they were basically saying like, hold on, this is bullshit. Our chemical does not hurt the fucking environment. You're literally making this illegal just to fuck our business over. Fuck you. And they took that to court and they won. And it was true. Canada, there was no evidence that this chemical was doing anything harmful to the environment. I want to say it was about tires, but it might have been something oil related or something different. But, it might have been ethyl corp. That might have been it as well. Let's see if we can find this. Sorry. I'm trying not to give as many stories when I do this, and we'll try to look up so that because sometimes I misremember stuff and I might fuck up. Oh God, is there an easy to read arbitration rules? The United Nations Commissions on International Trade Law. So this was appealed to the UN. Ethyl Corporation filed a notice of intent to submit a claim to arbitration on September 10th, 1996, and on April 14th, 1997, it submitted a notice of arbitration alleging that Canada breached its obligations under Chapter 11 as a result of introducing legislation banning the importation of and inter-provincial trade in MMT. What does MMT stand for here, I wonder? Something in some Canada market. Canada challenged the jurisdiction of the tribunal, and on June 14th, the tribunal issued a preliminary award on jurisdiction, rejecting some of Canada's challenges and joining some other objections to jurisdiction of the merits. Canada eventually settled this claim. Mixed martial trades, is that true? Fuck, can I find a write-up of this case? Wasn't that a general ban on coal? No, I don't believe so. Or I'm sorry, you're talking to someone else. Oh, this was the MMT might have been the additive that they used. In early April, the Canadian Parliament acted to ban the import and provincial transport of an ethyl product, the gasoline additive MMT, which Canada considers to be a dangerous toxin. Ethyl, the company that invented leaded gasoline, responded on April 14th by filing a lawsuit, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, hold on, I'm just skimming this real quick. Ethel argued that the MMT ban constituted expropriation. Okay, fuck. Where's the... There's got to be like a fucking Slate or Atlantic article or something. I don't want to just give my take on this. I'd like to have something else that I can like appeal to. Any reason why Canada banned it? So my understanding was that Canada originally claimed... My understanding is that Canada originally claimed that this additive was harmful to the environment. But that upon like further review, that evidence just didn't seem to exist. But then, and so eventually Canada settled. That was my understanding of it. But I just want to find something to see, like, so that I can like 100% know that's true. And I'm not just saying that or misremembering that. Why are we talking about femboys so much in my fucking YouTube chat? What are you guys doing? Damn, Canada getting sued a lot under NAFTA. I get fucked. I think Michael Brooks had a different example that he'd brought up, though. I wish I could remember what it was. God damn it. But whatever, regardless. Okay, I'll be ambiguous on this because I can't find exactly on what the scientific claims were made by both sides. But regardless, you want the ability to be able to sue a government if you believe that they're participating in non-competitive behavior. Hold on one second. I'm linking. Anti-competitive? Maybe. Oh, fuck. This might have been one, too. Vattenfall v. Germany? I don't remember how long ago because I was doing all this reading for the TPP. So here's another example. Is it Vattenfall, a Swedish energy firm, launched a $1.9 billion investor-state claim against Germany in 2009 under the Energy Charter Treaty over permit delays for a coal-fired power plant in Hamburg. According to Vattenfall, delays of required government permits started when the state's environmental ministry established very clear requirements for the plant due to the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change having alerted the public to the impending climate change. Public opposition to the proposed plant focused on prospective carbon emissions, and water pollution. Further delays, according to Vattenfall, occurred when the Green Party, which opposed the plant on environmental grounds, formed a coalition with the Christian Democrats after state elections in 2008. After Vattenfall litigated in domestic courts, the coalition government issued the permits to Vattenfall, but with additional requirements to protect the Elbe River. Rather than comply with these requirements, Vattenfall launched its investor-state claim against Germany, arguing that Hamburg's environmental rules amounted to expropriation and a violation of Germany's obligation to afford foreign investors fair and equitable treatment. In response, Michael Mueller, then Germany's deputy environmental minister, stated, "It's really unprecedented how we are being pilloried just for implementing German and European Union laws to avoid the uncertainty of a prospective investor-state tribunal ruling ordering payment without a massive amount of compensation. The German government reached a settlement with Vattenfall in 2010. The settlement obliged the Hamburg government to drop its additional environmental requirements and issue the contested permits required for the plant to proceed. The settlement also waived Vattenfall's earlier commitments to mitigate the coal plant's impact on the Elbe River. Any monetary payment extracted from German taxpayers on the settlement has not been disclosed. Vattenfall's coal plant in Hamburg began operating in February 2014. But, okay.
Potentially interferes a corporation, not a person, not you or me, but it allows a corporation to sue a state if the state is taking measures which might potentially interfere with profits. So if Mexico, say, decides to set up an environmentally protected region where some American corporation wants to invest, they can sue Mexico for taking their profits, their future profits, on the area that Mexico is trying to protect.
Hold on.
Wants to invest, set up an environmentally protected region where some American corporation wants to invest. They can sue Mexico for taking their profits.
It's possible this has happened. I haven't heard of this happening. My understanding is that typically these tribunals exist to protect like you from creating new laws that will fuck over investment. I haven't heard of somebody being like, I want to go build on this protected land, stop protecting it, and I'm going to build there. It's possible that's happened. I just haven't heard of that. It seems to be not in the spirit of the agreement, but...
Their future profits on the area that Mexico is trying to protect. That's, again, human beings can't do that, corporations can. These are the kinds of provisions that you see in the trade agreements. They're not free trade agreements. They're not about free trade. In fact, to a large extent, they're not about trade at all. And
this is a very one-dimensional view of the word free. It's kind of silly, but...
They're certainly not agreements, at least if people are part of their countries. People are mostly opposed to them, which is why they're in secret. So every word in the phrase free trade agreement is just false.
Like, under Chomsky's definition, free trade agreement literally means free, zero tariffs, trade, only talking about trade back and forth, and not like, not setting up foreign firms or anything. And then agreement means that people vote on it. I don't know. It's silly. If Mexico set up an area that wasn't available to business for anyone, including Mexico, it doesn't make sense that the U.S. could sue them to have the business there. Mexico also can't perform it. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I don't understand if that's ever happened, but... Destiny failing to understand anything Chomsky's saying because he doesn't know how much he doesn't know. It's very cringy. Librick, any charge. Do you want to come on to Discord and talk about that one, broski? You've been talking a lot of shit in that YouTube chat. What do you think I missed? Is Destiny Jewish? No, why the fuck do you think I'm Jewish? What do you think we should do then when it comes to protecting the environment and facilitating free trade? If there's important environmental protections, then make them. And then hopefully you're able to argue them, but you just don't do them to fuck over other companies, like foreign companies. Okay, we'll continue reading. The prediction for Mexico is exactly the same. The leading financial... Blah, blah, blah. Okay, we read this. On top of that, union organizing is essentially impossible. Corporations can operate internationally, but unions can't, so there's no way for the workforce to fight back against the internationalization of production. The net effect is expected to be a decline in wealth and income for most people in Mexico and for most people in the U.S. So this is something that I'm a little bit more familiar with. Negotiating worker rights is something that unions typically can't do. However, you should... As part of your negotiations for labor rights, you can do that as part of a multilateral trade agreement. So one reason I'm kind of familiar with this is because, Vietnam, TPP, labor provisions. I know that part of the TPP was negotiating labor rights for workers in other countries. We want this, technically. Even greedy corporations want this because you don't want other countries to be able to outcompete you with cheap labor, right? In the last decade, free trade agreements have expanded to cover more than traditional commercial matters like tariff reductions. Recent FTAs, free trade agreements, have increasingly included labor requirements to protect workers, especially in countries where companies pursue low-cost production through depressed wages, poor working conditions, and other subpar labor standards. This has had a dramatic effect on countries like Vietnam, where I've practiced law for 20 years, but even though FTAs regulating labor matters have increased dramatically in recent years, from 4 agreements in 95 to 72 by from 4 agreements in 1995 to 72 by 2015, Vietnam has refused to commit to labor requirements in FTAs until now. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is the first trade agreement to subject Vietnam to enforceable labor commitments like freedom of association, collective bargaining, and minimum work conditions. Additionally, Vietnam signed a labor implementation plan with the United States that identifies specific actions needed to comply with TPP and which are subject to an additional layer of enforcement. It is clear that TPP lives up to its name as a 21st century agreement, enacting the strongest labor provisions of any trade deal, giving the opportunity to improve living standards and the quality of work for Vietnamese people. These advantages range across a number of different areas, and then this kind of goes into it. When the U.S. stepped back from the TPP, I think Vietnam lost some of those labor things that they were fighting for. I remember seeing that as part of the Hanoi. I always forget how to pronounce this fucking place.
Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Hanoi.
Okay.
Hanoi is
Gotcha. Currently, Vietnamese law and practice are far removed from international labor standards and freedom of association, collective bargaining. First, according to the International Labor Organization, workers have the right to establish organizations of their own choosing without previous authorization, which implies the possibility of creating, if the workers so choose, more than one workers' organization per number. Oh, Vietnamese people, some of the socialist people always say like, oh, Vietnam has really strong labor unions, blah, 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 blah. Kind of. There's like, I believe that there's a single party in Vietnam, and I think that every union has to exist at the privilege of that one political party. Like there's like one union that encompasses everybody, or in different like areas. Like you have to be part of like the government union. You can't. That's my understanding of it. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. Well, actually, fuck. We're not gonna say that. Hold on. Vietnamese labor unions. We'll just look it up to make sure that I'm correct, so that it doesn't sound like I'm making stuff up. At present, Vietnam has only one legal state-led trade union federation, the Vietnam General Confederation of Labor, which is neither independent of the ruling Communist Party nor of employers. Independent unions are currently forbidden. Remember that the next time people say, oh, well, in Vietnam, they've got really strong labor union, blah, blah. That's not true. They have one labor union. It exists at the privilege of the government. At the national level, the VGCL is subordinated to the party, while the enterprise level is dominated by managers. It is not uncommon for a workplace union representative to be the company's human resources director or similar. Okay. Okay, we don't need to go too much more into this. I'm sorry. But the broader point I'm trying to make is that you can negotiate for labor rights on behalf, or you can negotiate on behalf of labor rights as part of these multilateral trade agreements. It's an important thing to keep in mind. So this idea that like union organizing is essentially impossible. Corporations operate internationally, but unions can't. So there's no way for the workforce to fight back against the internationalization of production. You have to. It's part of your negotiating of the trade agreement. But yeah. Wait, why does that make it weak? I'm dumb. Why does what make what weak? Wait, Peach, what are you doing? Don't start the server yet. I've got to finish this. Will cheap labor don't just move to other countries? Well, the whole point of free trade agreements is to make it so that doesn't happen, so that other countries have like more worker rights, so that you don't get fucked by low competition. I think it means having the union be party. Oh, well, if you want to negotiate different things with different unions, you lose the ability to do so because all of your unions exist at the privilege of a political party. So they basically dictate to you. Like it's hard to say like, we'll use some difficult examples. Let's say that I'm a coal worker and now my government decides that they want to make green movements, right? Well, I don't know if I feel good about my labor union being subordinate to the government that's now taking a green direction in energy. I'm a coal worker. I don't know if I'm going to be represented in that government. I don't know if they're going to fuck me over and destroy all my jobs. And I don't know if my union is going to represent me because that union is subordinate to a very green, very energy friendly, or like green energy friendly government, right? That's what I'm saying. You probably want some level of independence there, I would imagine. So even reading YouTube chat, yeah. I don't really understand this. Where did you read all this up? I'm looking up I'm Googling like everything I'm talking about. I think I've supported almost everything I've said so far. Are you serious? Come on. Chill. Okay. The strongest NAFTA advocates point that out in the small print. My colleague at MIT, Paul Krugman, is a specialist in international trade and, interestingly, one of the economists who's done some of the theoretical work showing why free trade doesn't work. He was nevertheless an enthusiastic advocate for NAFTA, which is, I should stress, not a free trade agreement. Wow, he's held on to this talking point for a long time. He agreed with the Times that unskilled workers, about 70% of the workforce, would lose. That Clinton administration has various fantasies about retraining workers, but that would probably have very little impact. In any case, they're doing nothing about it. So my understanding is that retraining workers under NAFTA was largely a failed endeavor. I think we opened up a thing. It was this. I think it was this, a transitional adjustment assistance provision, Title 5. My understanding was that by the end, so Irk emailed me on this to challenge some of this. Irk said that retraining can be done. It just has to be done in a more precise manner. My understanding is that the money spent on retraining in NAFTA just failed miserably, that we would have been better off literally just giving those people checks instead of spending money trying to retrain them. So this is true. One 2011 to 2012 study of the most generous of these programs, the Trade Adjustment Assistance, which was done under NAFTA, right, found that participants on average ended up earning less than those who hadn't gone through the program. I'm hoping that's controlling for the fact that, like, I didn't go through the program because I already had a bachelor's in computer science. I hope that they control for things like that. But generally, so the article is, why do U.S. retraining programs fall short? So I think it's generally accepted that usually these retraining programs suck, but yeah, okay. Did you ever find out if you got more money from YouTube Premium streaming from watching through Twitch or DGG? You can watch through whatever, it's fine. Why are we reading 26-year-old articles? It's just because it's the most upvoted thing. If you don't like it, submit your own article or go upvote, downvote your own shit. What do you mean? I started to read the top. Wait, are you serious? Okay, I'm insta-banning dumb fucking questions like that. The same thing is true of skilled white-collar workers. You can get software programmers in India who are very well trained at a fraction of the cost of Americans. Somebody involved in this business recently told me that Indian programmers are actually being brought to the U.S. and put into what are kind of like slave labor camps and kept at Indian salaries, a fraction of American salaries, doing software development. So that kind of work can be farmed out just as easily. So you kind of have to consider, like, who's winning and who's losing here, so let's just look at that transaction, okay? This is kind of what I don't like. I feel like some of these things are one-dimensional. So who's winning and who's losing in this type of thing? Let's say that Indians are coming to the United States and working for lower wages than native U.S. workers, right? So there's a couple things happening. So one loser here, so we can look at a loser immediately, okay? A loser is going to be an American programmer. There's going to be downward pressure on their wages, right? As you increase the supply of that type of work available, that type of labor available in the US, there's going to be a downward pressure on their wages. More computer programmers means we have to pay them less, right? That's one thing, and that's what we're talking about here. But there's also pressure in other directions as well. So one, the average earning of somebody working in an Indian firm is going to increase, right? The amount of computer programmers in India will decrease, so there'll be upward pressure on their wages there. And the actual Indian immigrant that comes over to the United States is also making an individual massive gain. So upward pressure on his wages. That's good. There's also going to be, hopefully, an upward pressure or an upward movement in the amount of money made by a corporation that employs somebody to lower costs. And there's also hopefully going to be downwards pressure on the cost of a good or service offered by a firm that is employing cheaper labor as well, right? Cheaper labor means you decrease cost, which means you can either decrease the final cost of a good or service, or you can increase the amount of money that you make for your owners or your shareholders, right? So it's not just one thing that's happening. There are good things and bad things about all of this. Like decreased wages of programmers is bad. That's bad for programmers, so we should find some way to deal with that. However, the person that immigrates making more money, that's technically good. The increase, hopefully, in the wages of programmers in India is hopefully good as well. That's a second thing, because now Indian firms are going to have to compete with American firms in terms of hiring practices. Thirdly, the increased profits or revenues of a corporation is good. It means any shareholder, any investor in that corporation will make more money, or the corporation will make more money. And then the downward pressure on the cost of goods or services, like the final product, is going to be good for the consumer, right? Now, obviously, all of these things can move in different ways. It's possible that a corporation could fuck somebody over. It's possible that something could happen, right? It could be good, it could be bad. But there's more than one thing to look at when we're analyzing like these kind of trade things. It's not just worker comes over, American worker fucked, and that's the end of the story, right? There's a lot of other stuff that's going on here as well. The search for profit, when it's unconstrained and free from public control, will naturally try to repress people's lives as much as possible. The executives wouldn't be doing their jobs otherwise. This is kind of true, yeah. What accounted for all the opposition to NAFTA? So the goal of a firm is to maximize profits. Labor is a cost of doing business. Your goal is to decrease cost as much as possible. You want to pay as little as possible to get as much work as possible. This is generally true, right? The original expectation was that NAFTA would just sail through. Nobody would even know what it was, so it was signed in secret. It was put on a fast track in Congress, meaning essentially no discussion. There was virtually no media coverage. Who was going to know about a complex trade agreement? That didn't work, and there are a number of reasons why it didn't work. For one thing, the labor movement got organized for once and made an issue of it. There was this sort of maverick third-party candidate, Ross Perot, who managed to make it a public issue. And it turned out that as soon as the public learned anything about NAFTA, they were pretty much opposed. I followed the media coverage on this, which was extremely interesting. Usually the media try to keep their class loyalties more or less in the background. They try to pretend that they don't have them. But on this issue, the bars were down. They went berserk. And toward the end, when it looked like NAFTA might not pass, they just turned into raving maniacs. But despite this enormous media barrage and the government attack, huge amounts of corporate lobbying, which totally dwarfed all the other lobbying, of course, the level of opposition remained pretty stable. Roughly 60% of those who had an opinion remained opposed. The same sort of media barrage influenced the Gore-Perot television debate. I didn't watch it, but friends who did thought Perot just wiped Gore off the map, but the media proclaimed that Gore won a massive victory. Was that through like polling or what? Like, this is a very weird, this sounds a little biased. Why wouldn't you watch that debate if you were going to write about it? It seems kind of strange, but my friend said that Perot killed Gore in that debate. That seems kind of weird, but okay. In polls the next day, people were asked what they thought about the debate. The percentage who thought that Perot had been smashed was far higher than the percentage who'd seen the debate, which means that most people were just being told what to think by the media, not coming to their own conclusions. I'm sorry, Chomsky, but this is probably how things always have been and always will continue to be. Incidentally, what was planned for NAFTA workers, for GATT there, was virtually no public opposition to it or even awareness of it. It was ramped through in secret as intended. What about the position people like to find ourselves in of being against or being anti-reactive rather than proactive? NAFTA is a good case because very few NAFTA critics were opposed to any agreement. Virtually everyone, the labor movement, the Congressional Office of Technology Assessment, a major report that was suppressed, and other critics, including me, were saying there'd be nothing wrong with the North American Free Trade Agreement, but this is not one. It should be different. And here are the ways in which it should be different in some detail. Even Perot had constructive proposals, but all that was suppressed. Okay, so we have prescriptions, meaning things we should do. What's left is the picture that, say, Anthony Lewis portrayed in the Times. Jingoist fanatics screaming about NAFTA. Incidentally, what's called the left played the same game. James Galbraith is an economist at the University of Texas. He had an article in a sort of left liberal journal, World Policy Review, in which he discussed an article in which I said the opposite of what he attributed to me, of course, but that's typical. Galbraith said that there's this jingoist left nationalist fanatics who don't want Mexican workers to improve their lives. This is the standard on our neoliberal whenever people are like, why do you hate the global poor? That's kind of funny. Then he went on about how the Mexicans are in favor of NAFTA. True, if by Mexicans, you mean Mexican industrialists and executives and corporate lawyers, not Mexican workers and peasants. All the way from people like James Galbraith and Anthony Lewis to way over to the right, you had this very useful fabrication that critics of NAFTA were reactive and negative and jingoist and against progress and just want to go back to the old-time protections. I don't know what this word actually means. Could you remove the chat while reading this? It's hard to follow along. I'm mad at you. Jingoists really dislike people from outside their own borders. It's an extreme form of patriotism that often calls for violence against foreigners in foreign countries. Gotcha. Okay. It's like fascists. When you have essentially total control of the information system, it's rather easy to convey that image, but it simply isn't true. Oof. It's almost as though their consent were manufactured. Anthony Lewis also wrote, the engine for the world's growth has been vastly increased. International trade. Do you agree? This is kind of a weird quote. A lot of truncated stuff here, but his use of the word trade, while conventional, is misleading. The latest figures available from about 10 years ago, they're probably higher now, show that about 30 to 40% of what's called world trade is actually internal transfers within a corporation. I believe that about 70% of Japanese exports to the US are intra-firm transfers of this sort. Is that a bad thing? If Japan sets up a firm in the United States and they begin transferring a ton of products to and from the US via that firm, wouldn't that increase in liberalization of trade be a good thing? Why is that a bad thing? Does anybody know? I don't know why that would be considered a bad thing. If they're selling or buying goods or services here that they weren't before, why is that bad? Unless you don't like the idea of a foreign country profiting off of your people, I guess. Destiny. In the earlier example, could the upward pressure on Indian wages be quite small because of their huge population? The numbers of workers going to the U.S. would be a small fraction of the total. Possibly. That's one way to look at it. Possibly. I don't know how many, like, what the distribution of programmers is in India versus the United States, but... Okay. So, for example, Ford Motor Company will have components manufactured here in the U.S. and then ship them for assembly to a plant in Mexico where the workers get much lower wages and where Ford doesn't have to worry about pollution, unions, and all that nonsense. Then they ship the assembled part back here. So when trade agreements are done, usually trade agreements try to hold other countries to the same standard when it comes to like pollution or when it comes to or when it comes to like worker rights, right? So as we read with the TPP, maybe NAFTA is an older agreement, so maybe they didn't enforce as many of those provisions, but about half of what are called, but also this is part of Mexico's job as well. Mexico should be negotiating NAFTA on their behalf as well, right? Unless Mexico thinks that the economic gains of this transaction are more worthwhile than whatever environmental benefits they'd have, right? About half of what are called U.S. exports to Mexico are intra-firm transfers of this sort. They don't enter the Mexican market, and there's no meaningful sense in which they're exports to Mexico. Still, that's called trade. Well, I mean, I'm sure that those corporations are probably paying taxes to the Mexican government, if not a value-added tax, like some sort of operational firm tax. And then I'm sure that the workers there are paying taxes as well. Like, I'm sure there's some sort of, like, economic activity, or at least a fiscal one going on with, like, paying for, like, taxes and whatnot, but... is it bad because it's an internal transfer and not really benefiting the host nation, i.e. major Japanese ownership would be sending those parts to Mexico, benefiting a Japanese majority-owned business? Is that bad? Well, I mean, like, if you're trading more within the country, I mean, if there are, like, workers that are working there, if you're paying taxes, like... The corporations that do this are huge totalitarian institutions, and they aren't governed by market principles. In fact, they promote severe market distortions. For example, a U.S. corporation that has an outlet in Puerto Rico may decide to take its profits in Puerto Rico because of tax rebates. It shifts its prices around using what's called transfer pricing, so it doesn't seem to be making a profit here. I mean, these are things of the tax code that just have to be addressed. Like, sure, like being able to take advantage of, like, transfer pricing or basically like tax advantaged distributions in other countries or territories is probably not something we want, but you'd have to I mean that's stuff that you have to take into account with your legislation. Like, yeah, I don't know what else to say. Like, that's not an argument against anything, you know? Like, that's like I really want to go to the bar with Frank, but the problem is if I take Frank to the bar, he's going to start raping everybody. So I don't really think I can go to the bar tonight. Well, like, wait, why don't you make Frank not a fucking rapist? Why don't you fix Frank's behavior, right? Like, saying that, like, well, intertrade stuff is bad because people might take advantage of shitty parts of the tax code. Okay, well, fix the tax code then, right? Make it so that those types of transfer payments are subject to either fees or fines or taxes. Like, don't let them get away with that thing. Like, that's not an argument against increased liberalization of trade. That's a fault with the tax code that needs to be addressed. There are estimates of the scale of governmental operations that interfere with trade, but I know of no estimates of internal corporate interferences with market processes. They're no doubt vast in scale and are sure to be extended by the trade agreements. GATT and NAFTA ought to be called investor rights agreements, not free trade agreements. One of their main purposes is to extend the ability of corporations to carry out market-distorting operations internally. So when people like Clinton's National Security Advisor, Anthony Lake, talk about enlarging market democracy, he's enlarging something, but it's not markets and it's not democracy. Good one.
Money. Put money on it. Money. Bet me.
Yes or no? Do you have a Taiwanese power supply inside your rig?
You've seen the power